Screencast on the Philosopher's Stone, the enneagram, and self-computing. Today is Monday, January 14th at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. So, to begin. So, there are a lot of popular cultural references to spiritual transformation and like alchemy and magic. We're starting off here with an example from Sherlock Holmes film, one of the more recent ones. And you can see that there is astrological symbols in this frame and some weird magical emblematic picture or diagram of a pentagram, which is fundamentally a very deep and used very often to represent the mystical or the magical spiritual transformation. Here we have the circle, a circle of stones at Stonehenge. We see the circle everywhere. We see the circle here in North American, Native American traditions. And we see the circle as represented in 9 divisions in this design for the Mashrikul al-Azkar of the Baha'i faith, which was designed by Mason Remy under the guidance of Abdul Baha. So the circle is everywhere, really, in terms of spiritual transformation. It's a very deep and lasting symbol that we encounter again and again. So to begin with, we have here is a circle that is dividing basically what are the traditional psychology that has been passed down throughout the ages in philosophy. We have aql, which is mind in Arabic, nafs, which is like self or soul, and qalb, which is heart. These are things, this particular diagram was taken from a Naqshbandi Sufi rendition of traditional psychology in the enneagram, the 9-pointed symbol. We encounter this in the Baha'i faith in the 4 valleys of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith and the prophet of it. He has 4 valleys, and one of those valleys is spiritual center is the self or nafs, and another one is the mind or aql, and another is the heart or qalb. Then it becomes united in a 4th level or a 4th valley where everything is combined and holistic and centered, where the 3 powers do not dominate. Typically this is viewed as 3 major types of people who are dominated by mind, people who are dominated by like emotions or nafs, and people who are dominated by like heartfelt things we associate with the heart, the qalb. Now, it's interesting that in the 3rd valley, which deals with the heart, that in what most Baha'is understand as the translation of this passage, in the 3rd valley, it says, "In this realm instruction is assuredly of no avail. The lover's teacher is the loved one's beauty, his face, their lesson, and their only book. Learning of wonderment, of longing love, their duty, not on learned chapters and dull themes they look. The chain that binds them is his musky hair. The cyclic scheme to them is but to him a stair." Now this is a passage from Rumi that Baha'u'llah is quoting. But the 4 valleys or the 7 valleys were never translated by the guardian of the Baha'i faith, who is like the kind of viewed as the authority in terms of interpretation. Shoghi Effendi never interpreted these spiritual books. This is an interpretation done by a lay believer named Marziya Gal. But what we notice here is like there are some interesting terms like silsila is mentioned, the chain, which is the family tree or how the lineage goes down in the spiritual tradition, and they're grasping onto musky hair, or can also be translated as lock of hair. But that's not really what's most interesting, is that in the printed edition, at least in the Farsi version that's available online, there's a typo. And when we reference the same passage in Nicholson, this is Nicholson's translation of the same passage. For lovers, the only lecture is the beauty of the beloved. Their only book and lecture and lesson is his face. They are silent, but the shrill noise of their repetition is going up to the throne and high seat of their friend. Their only lesson is enthusiasm in the whirling dance and quaking agitation, not the ziyadah and the chapter on the chain. The chain of these people is the musk-dropping curls. They have the question of the circle, but it is the circle of the friend. Now, it may be an interesting little coincidence that Baha'u'llah is quoting this passage. Rumi is, the founder of Mevlevi Sufi tradition, which is based out of Turkey and is known as the whirling dervishes, so they turn in circles. And that's their spiritual, meditation, is to turn in these circles, in circles. They are turning as the planets circle. And what's interesting is the term here is dawr. The Arabic term is dawr. Typically in English we would spell it D-A-W-R. Dawara. Now this can be interpreted as a cycle, as Samarzia Gale interpreted it, or it can be interpreted as a circle, as Nicholson interpreted it, but it can also be interpreted as a wheel. So again, we're seeing the circle-wheel combination. It's going down. We know this is in Sufi tradition here. It's pretty, deeply embedded. Here is the Naqshbandi Sufi rendition of the circle, but it's divided into 9 points. And in the middle is a pyramid or a triangle of 3 points, which correlate to the positions of 3, 6, and 9. And surrounding those points are the positions of 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, and 8. Now, what we find here is an interesting little coincidence, because Baha'u'llah spent a lot of time with the Naqshbandis in Soleimania, in Kurdistan of Iraq, and before he laid the claim to being the prophet founder of a new religion. So Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, says this about what people said about Baha'u'llah during this time when he was with the Naqshbandis in Kurdistan. Shoghi Effendi relates that Baha'u'llah was known as an alchemist to some during his sojourn in Kurdistan with the Naqshbandi Sufis, which we know held that the enneagram was the alchemical Philosophers Stone. And this is referenced in God Passes By, page 164, written by Shoghi Effendi. He talks about Baha'u'llah being known as an alchemist. And it's an interesting correlation because he's also known as a Sufi, a mystic, So we have this correlation going on between alchemism and a spiritual path. This is something as rendered by Stephen Lambdin from Baha'u'llah. And now as regards the question about the alchemical elixir, al-iksir. Know you that God did not create anything except he deposited within it the letter of the elixir, harf al-iksir, in accordance with its level of being. And as for the hidden realities of the elixir, if you desire to obtain it, then journey with me unto the divine throne, until you have winged your way above it through the assistance available to you. Until that is, you witness the celestial Sinaitic fire, which is this greatest name of God, Isma'ullah al-Akbar. Then make it to blaze forth so as to remove the covering from the inmost heart. Then place the alchemical retort upon the brim of the alembic, and partake of the fruit of the tree, which emerges from Mount Sinai. Above the edge, commensurate with on the level of the divine power in the midmost heart of the divine power, and let it pour forth unto its place. Now later on we're going to see how this all ties together, but the key here is the greatest name of God. Now in the Baha'i faith, the greatest name of God is Baha. It's also rendered in a more superlative form as Abha. Here we see the symbol, the 9-pointed symbol, but in a different sense. It's more holistic, it's centered, it doesn't have an imbalance. The 3, 6, 9 are part of the unity of it all. This is the symbol of when you have gone through the enneagram, you come to this point, to this end, where you are balanced, and this would be the symbol that would represent that. It's a 9-pointed star, which is not the official symbol of the Baha'i faith. The pentagram actually is the official symbol of the Baha'i faith. But this is a symbol that Abdul Baha encouraged Baha'is to use and to put on their like parchments and books, and it became identified, and the number 9 became identified with the Baha'i faith. But it's important to realize that here we have what the numerical value of Baha is 9, and according to the numerological terms of Arabic called abjad. So Baha means, when you add up those correlations between the letters to their numerical value, it equals 9 when you add them all up. Others have taken the enneagram, this 9-point and star symbol, and related it to what are known as Pythagorean tones or solfege tones. This is a pretty common thing. These things do not originate with Pythagoras. Pythagoras went and traveled east, and according to some of his students, he actually learned these things on Mount Carmel in what is now modern-day Israel. Others have related this to the colors, and color symbolism will become very important. We'll see in the Bible, the rainbow is revealed as the symbol of God's covenant. So Isaac Newton, who was also interested in alchemical studies and spiritual transformation studies, related the rainbow that he found in his prisms to the solfege tones, and he also added 2 colors, not the usual 7 colors that we know in the rainbow. There are actually 9 colors according to Isaac Newton's studies. So this leaves us with, here we are with the number 9. But it's interesting that another way to come to this, and we will see later when Baha'u'llah is talking about alchemy and what Jesus said about alchemy, that 9 is taken, according to Sufi tradition, from the Arabic term to be, which is kun. So kun is 3 letters, kaf, wa, nun. When you add up those 3 letters, you get 9 letters. There's also an interesting pattern that goes on in the first 9. They're called the recurrences, and this was studied by Iamblichus, who was a Syrian who lived in the 3rd century of the Common Era. He was a Greek philosopher, basically, is how people will refer to him. But he was a Pythagorean, basically, and he was into these things, alchemy and all these things, and recording arithmetic and how the numbers came up. And he notes that people call something called the recurrences, which is basically what has been popularized lately by a Baha'i named Marco Rodin. But you find these originally in the ancient world. They were aware of them, which is that basically there are patterns within 1 through 9. An example of this is 1 plus 1 is 2, and 1 plus 2 is 3, and 2 plus 3 is 5, and 5 plus 3 is 8, and 8 plus 5 is 13, but 1 plus 3 is 4, and it keeps on cycling like that. And here is the example of the groupings that you come up with when you, these are called the recurrences. I'm not going to go into these, but if you want to learn more about it, you can just Google Marco Rodin, and he can talk. There are plenty of videos that go into this thing. Now in the Quran, the 9, the enneagram, it comes about basically in the story of Lut. Interestingly enough, it's not really about homosexuality at all, but about negative traits. And in this passage, if you want to look it up, it's Quran 27, chapter 27, verses 45 through 83, and this is where it appears. Now, I'm not going to go into detail with this. This is taken from Layla Bakhtiar's book from the Naqshbandi tradition, the rendering of the enneagram. It's in volume 2, page 124 to 125. But basically there are 9 negative attributes, which is interesting because in the Bible there are 9 positive attributes related to the Spirit, and we'll get into those later. Now the number 7 is another interesting number that occurs in relation to the Enneagram. We know that there are 7 valleys that Baha'u'llah wrote about. This has origination probably in what is known in anthropology as Proto-Indo-European religious systems, which may or may not be traced back to relatively the eastern part of Turkey, also in Armenia. There seems to be a large correlation to Armenian ancient civilization. Some of the first cities were in this area. Some of the first astrological or astronomy studies were done. Observatories were in ancient Armenia, like dating back to the 5000 before the Common Era. So we're talking about a long time ago, but in this early religion there are also 7 deities, but these are related to the visible planets to the human eye. So there are 7 divine names of perfection which relate to these planets, and there are 7 prophets which relate to these planets, which you will also find scattered throughout the Baha'i writings: Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, Muhammad. And 7 divine names are like the living, the knowing, the powerful, the willing, the speaking, the hearing, and the seeing. There are also, in traditional Sufism, there are 7 lataif, which are subtleties, which are like chakras in Hinduism. Subtle parts of the body which need to be transformed and engaged and energized. There are 12 signs and 7 planets that transverse these signs, and we'll get into astrology later and how it relates to the enneagram. But when you add the 7 planets and the 12 signs together, you get 19, which is another important number for, Baha'is. Now, there are also, we're going to start getting into the understanding of what a human being is. What are we? But before we do that, when we get into that understanding, we're going to talk about elements of hot and cold and wet, wet, cold, dry, hot are the humors, so to speak, and these are related to the numbers 3, 6, and 9 are cold and dry, and 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, and 7 are hot and wet. So what we see is 7 signs in the unity. There are 7 steps to unity, like going to 7 valleys. So we have in this symbol of the enneagram, 3, 6, and 9 are not part of the mathematical recurrences. You have 7 steps to perfection. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, and 7. And the 7th one is complete balance, and that brings you to the 7th valley. And this is also related to pi, which is the ratio of 22 sevenths. Traditional Pythagorean pi was 3.142857. So what we actually see here is a symbol, is that 3 is perfection. When 3, 6, and 9 are in balance, that's the symbol that you have completed yourself. 3.142857, the 0.142857, the fractions thereof are you getting to the 3. Now, there's also, you can fit the 9 into 7 lataif or chakras. When you view the one chakra is actually duplicated when you view it from different perspectives: the heart, the mind, and the gut or nafs. When you view one chakra is shared between each of those. The symbol of unity is called the natak, and it represents unity and wholeness and centeredness, and that's when you complete the process, the 9 points become a natak, and it becomes unity, the Baha'i symbol of unity and balance and centeredness and being grounded. So we're going to take a break here.